Greetings everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. I finally finished a full playthrough of Black Geyser Couriers of Darkness, and that means I can provide you all with a review. But first, I wanted to give you all something a little bit different, because similar to what I said in my last video, many of you have said you find this game to be very difficult and could use some guidance on how to get through it. So as a follow-up to my video where we ranked all of the different companions, I'm going to go over some team composition strategies and help you figure out how exactly to put together a team that's going to allow you to get through the game relatively painlessly. Now, a couple of notes before we get into this. First and foremost, this is going to be a spoiler-free video, so you don't have to worry about having already experienced the story before you watch this. Also, I am going to assume that you've already watched my video ranking all the companions, so I'm not going to do a deep dive on what each of them does. I'm just going to mention a name and say they're associated with a particular role, and I'm just going to assume that you can connect the dots and understand what that means. But if you're confused, definitely circle back and watch my previous video. Obviously, we got more Black Geyser and CRPG content coming, so if that interests you, make sure you subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss any of my videos. Now, let's go ahead and get into it. First and foremost, you do not have to watch this if you don't want to. I'm just going to have some general footage up and then use some text in order to help illustrate my point. But if you prefer to just listen to this video, you can absolutely do that. So to figure out what kind of team that you want to put together, first and foremost, we need to review what do you need in order to have a relatively painless time with this game. So first and foremost, you need a sturdy front line, because most likely you're going to have a squishy back line that you don't want enemies running into. So you need a front line that's going to be able to control the flow of enemies. You're going to need to have high damage to make sure that you're wiping these enemies out before they are able to overcome your party. You're going to need healing, because enemies hit like trucks in this game, and you're going to have to heal through a lot of that. You're going to need some buffing and debuffing. This is not a game where you could just deal with enemies straight up. You have to be able to buff yourself and prepare for certain encounters. You also need persuasion. You could technically put this as a want, but I'm going to go ahead and say a need, because there's so much content and rewards that are locked behind being able to successfully persuade people that I really do consider this a must. And then finally, you're absolutely going to want to be able to pick locks and plant items. We'll talk about that a little more in just a bit. All right, so breaking these down one by one. First and foremost, a sturdy front line. Who is going to help you in order to make that happen? Well, the best person to have on your team is Helgenhar. He could be your primary tank. And the reason he's so great is that he has the fighter class, which automatically taunts while he's running around. So that's just going to help you control everything much, much easier. Second place is Jade. She can fill up the battlefield with a lot of summons. As far as I can tell, there are no limits to how many allies you can summon in. So you could have 15 or 20 different creatures out at the same time, all helping you against your enemies. Jade is going to help you do that. Number 3 would be Siracca. She has medium armor and she has a lot of buffs she can place on herself to help her stand up in the front line. So you can use her. I think she works best as a secondary tank, not as the primary tank, but if you absolutely wanted to, you could use her as the primary tank in a pinch. Next up is Arvex. He has medium armor with very, very high physique. So he is probably going to need some buffs in order to really be able to stand in there, but you can definitely use him to help control the front line as well. And then finally, Rabanandera. He has high health summons. So the damage for these summons does not scale, which is part of the reason why I do not like using him as a character, but his summons do have high health. So if you just want to throw creatures out there to help control the front line, he's someone who can help you do that, and it's definitely something to consider. Moving on to high damage. First on the list is Bajala. She's probably the best bomber in the game. So if you want someone who's just going to throw out fireball, chain lightning, all those type of spells. Bajala is really going to be able to help you. Jade is also a great option for bomber as well, and she has access to many of the same spells Bajala has, but I'd put Bajala a little bit higher in this list. Now, Jade does have a little bit better variety because as a necromancer, her summons are going to scale in both health and damage. So not only can she bomb on enemies, but she can also use summons to devastate them as well. And in the case of both Bajala and Jade, they can use scrolls. So even if you don't have slots for a great spell, you might have a scroll assigned to them for, again, fireball or something similar, and you can wipe out enemies that way. Another great option is Hamlin. He specializes in bows. Bows are amazing in this game, especially if you combine them with the right arrows. There are a bunch of different arrows that are meant to be used against specific enemies, and he can really light enemies up when you combo those properly. And then finally, both Arvex and Helgenhar are capable of using two-handed weapons. They're also capable of using a sword and board type of build as well, and so they'll deal decent damage either way. But if you give them two-handed weapons and then build up that two-handed weapon skill, you're going to really be able to just go to town with those characters. Next up on the list is healing. So of course, first on the list is Siracca, who is your cleric. She gets a ton of different healing spells that can not only heal one target, but can heal the whole party at the same time. So it's part of the reason she's a mainstay in my group. Water Hag is a druid, and she can also help you with healing, but she's a very mediocre frontline fighter, so personally I prefer not to use her. Rabanandera is a shaman, and he also has access to healing, but as I mentioned before, I found him mediocre in combat, so personally he does not serve as my main healer. And then finally, if none of that appeals to you, there's also a wealth of potions and powders that you can make use of that can help with healing as well. So you could potentially keep your cleric on the bench and instead just have somebody who specializes in brewing and drying and focus strictly on potions as the way that you heal yourself. This can obviously get to be a little bit more expensive to manage because there's only so many ingredients that you get, and so you might end up having to buy a lot more health potions, but it's absolutely viable, and money isn't really a big deal in this game by the time you get to mid-game if you're a thorough type of player. All right, next up is buffing and debuffing. In my personal opinion, buffing is a lot more important than debuffing is. Debuffing is absolutely nice to help disable some of what enemies can do and to make them easier to kill. But the problem is, just like you can create powders, enemies can create powders as well. So you could debuff the crap out of an enemy to the point that just one more hit and they'll go down, but they'll throw a powder on your whole group and all of a sudden everybody is confused and they are attacking each other. So it's really important that your party is properly buffed and can defend against some of the crazy effects enemies will try to deploy against you. Enemies love to charm your party in this game. In fact, it's one of the major drawbacks of being a summoner. There's nothing more disheartening than throwing 7 wolves out onto the field and having all of them get charmed against your party. So it's definitely something that you have to deal with, and you want to make sure you have the proper buffs to protect your party against those type of situations. Again, Siracca is going to be absolutely fantastic for that role as a cleric. She's going to have some powers that'll really help you. Rabanandera and the Water Hag not only have spells that will help you with this, but also both of them have classes that extend the duration that spells last as they level up. So your buffs are going to last a lot longer than they would for other characters. And similar to healing, you can use potions and or powders for buffing and debuffing as well. In fact, it's an absolutely fantastic option. There are many potions as you get later into the game that will give you 4 buffs at the same time. And frankly, it can be great to do this in tandem with having a cleric. So let someone pop a potion and then maybe the cleric puts on a different list of buffs that are available. The cleric also gets a spell that will take the buffs on one person and pull it to the entire team. So that can be an extremely powerful combination if you're able to set that person up properly towards the beginning of the fight when everybody's in the same area. Very, very good way to keep all of your people protected. And then next up we have Persuasion. Again, Hamlin is going to be great for this. Now, keep in mind that Persuasion isn't really about charisma the way it is in most games. Instead, there's a bargain and persuasion skill that's really going to determine how persuasive you are. Now, the unfortunate thing about this system is most likely whatever character you use for Persuasion is going to have to equip a bunch of items that raise that skill in order for it to be high enough that you'll win most checks during conversations. Hamlin is one of the few characters who is set up in a way that he can dedicate a bunch of items to Persuasion, but at the same time he loses nothing in combat. And so it's really, really helpful when you're trying to figure out how to build your team. Another option is Them. Them comes with very, very high charisma, and charisma plays directly into the bargain and persuasion skill. So you can get high bargain and persuasion without high charisma, but of course high charisma makes it easier. Unfortunately, Them has very mediocre combat stats, and so I definitely prefer to use Hamlin. Next up, pick locks and plant items, which should be self-explanatory. You want to be able to lock pick all the different things and get that gear. And there are some quests that specifically require for you to plant objects on items or people. So having someone with some decent ranks in this area is definitely going to be helpful as well. Hamlin, again, can satisfy both of these. Them can as well. Arvax and Helgenhar are capable of forcing locks. So there's a pick locks option that'll allow you to lock pick all of the different padlocks you come into contact with. But there's also a force lock option where as a warrior, you just break the lock. And unlike a lot of other games, breaking the lock does not destroy the equipment within. So technically it is a viable option. The problem is you get less XP for forcing a lock than you would if you pick the lock, and warriors do not have plant item as a skill, so you're still going to end up needing a rogue who can handle those tasks for you. And so personally, I kind of see force lock as rather useless because it doesn't allow you to replace a rogue with a warrior because you don't get all of the functionality that you actually need. All right, so that covers all of the features that I feel like are pretty much essential for you to have a good time with Black Geyser. There are a couple of more options that I wouldn't necessarily call them essential, but I do think if you have them available, it's going to make things much, much easier for you. First up on the list is disabling traps. There are not a ton of traps throughout the overall game, but there are specific places where there are a lot of traps. And so it's useful to have someone who can take care of this for you. Now, there are two different types of traps: magical and mechanical. As far as I can tell, mechanical traps don't matter. And I say this because my entire playthrough, I only had a person who was capable of picking up magical traps, and it was never an issue. There was never a time in the game where I attempted to pick up a trap and I was told, hey, it's mechanical, not magical, so you can't pick this up. And I can count on one hand the number of times I failed to pick up a trap. So overall, I would say you can just focus on magical and you'll be fine. To that end, both Bajala and Jade have a skill that allows them to pick up magic traps, and so you can choose either one in order to be able to accomplish that. Abolish curses is also going to be helpful. So as you progress through the game, you're going to pick up powerful items that are cursed at first, and that means it's going to have a bunch of negative statuses along with whatever positive features it has as well. So you need to remove the curse first so so that you can get the full effects of the item without any negative problems. Now, you can go to a temple and have a curse removed, but it can be very, very expensive. In fact, I think it's more expensive depending on how powerful the object is. So it's easier if you have someone on your team who is capable of taking care of that. Siracca, Rabanandera, and Water Hag all come with the skill that allows them to abolish curses. I don't know how much you need in this skill. There's a guide on Neo Seeker that says you need about 6, maybe 7 rank here in order to be able to remove most curses in the game. And so I left the stat around there and I never had an issue. So I'd venture to say that that's still correct even in the current version of the game. All right, so that's a full overview of everything that you need or want to have available based on your team in Black Geyser Couriers of Darkness. So based on that, let's go ahead and take a look at the team that I decided to put together. So as my frontline tank, I use Helgenhar. And again, this is going to allow me to control the front line. He's going to give serviceable damage. He could do more if I made him a two-hander, but I'm going to make him sword and board so that he can take as much damage as possible. And he has a little bit of self-buffing with his Vigilance Warrior skill. It's going to allow him to get the vast majority of what he needs in order to operate within the fray. Next up is Hamlin. So he's going to provide me with high range damage, lock picking, he can plant items, and he's going to handle all of my persuasion needs as well. Next up on the list is Siracca. She's my secondary frontline tank. She once again only does mediocre damage. It's not crazy, except against undead. Because she's a cleric, she can do really nice things against undead enemies, and there are a ton of them throughout the game. She also, of course, provides healing and buffing, and she can abolish curses on items that I find. So those 3 are the people who are always on my team pretty much no matter what. Then I have 2 people I switch out depending on the situation that I use for high damage, and that's Jade and Arvax. Arvax is of course great because I can give him a two-handed weapon and let him go to town, or if it's a really rough fight and I feel like he needs some extra protection, I can always switch him over to a hammer and shield. As a Highlander, he automatically gets a greater chance to knock down enemies with the hammer, and so that works out very nicely. My preferred character to use in this role, however, was Jade. Once I recruited Jade, she pretty much was always in my party because I absolutely love summoning, and even though I'm a Convoker, I put out completely different summons from what a necromancer would use, and so it allows me to fill up the screen with a wide variety of different characters. Super cool. I felt like with my main character, this team worked very well. Now, if you're like me, you prefer to choose a main character who has a class that's not already covered by the available party members. So let's go over that. What classes do the party members in the game already have? Cleric, Druid, Fighter, Highlander, Necromancer, Shaman, Spellweaver, Swindler, and Thief. That leaves 4 classes that are not accounted for. So let's go ahead and go over them briefly. First up is the one that I chose, Convoker. This is the most powerful summoner in the game because unlike Necromancer, which only levels up health and damage for summoners as you get more powerful, Convoker also levels up how long your summons are out. And so it's going to ensure that in the toughest of fights, your summons are going to be up to the task and will be out there on the field. Convoker also allows you to deploy allies in higher numbers than Necromancer does. So a spell for Necromancer that might only throw out 2 or 3 allies, the same type of spell for a Convoker is easily going to throw out 5, 6, maybe even 10 allies with just one click of a button. Super cool. Also, some different summons are going to use different types of damage. So you can have range summons, you can have summons that might deal a certain elemental damage. And so you'll get a feel for that and can figure out how to layer the field in a way where all of your summons are going to be effective and deal damage in some sort of way. Also, as a Convoker, you are going to be a caster, which means you should absolutely get high ranks in learning and research, which means you're going to be able to use all of the amazing scrolls throughout the game as well. Technically, if you decide to go as a Convoker, it's the only caster you need, and you could easily keep Bajala and Jade on the bench if you wanted to, even though that's not what I chose to do. Another uncovered class is Ranger. Now, Ranger is the most powerful archer in the game, and I already mentioned that bows are amazing, so Ranger can really blow up enemies for single target damage. And on top of that, they get more damage against undead and machines. I very rarely face machines, but undead are absolutely littered throughout the game, so getting more damage against them is a big deal. Rangers get spell casting at level 4. More on that in a minute. And you might think that Ranger would be redundant with Hamlin, but that's actually not the case, especially since Ranger gets different abilities from Hamlin. They get more Ranger type abilities, and so you could have both of them using bows, but in very different ways that just destroy foes. But on that same note, keep in mind, Hamlin will still be necessary in your team because Rangers don't get access to pick locks or place items or some of the other things that you're really going to need Hamlin to do. And most likely, you don't want to fill up your main character with a bunch of persuasion items. So you're still going to have them on the list. Interesting note, multi-classing is available in the game, and I mentioned Rangers get spells at level 4. They get a lot of summoning spells. So guess what's a great multi-classing option? Ranger and Convoker. As a Convoker, you're going to throw out a couple of summons, and then you're going to use your regular weapon attacks while your summons are doing cleanup work. So Ranger actually works really well because you could just let your arrows fly while your summons are doing the heavy lifting. If I was going to replay the game, this is probably the way that I would replay it. Next up on the list is Templar. So as a Templar, you can wear any armor in the game, which is a big deal. You only get one party member who can wear heavy armor, and so you being a character who's also capable of it is going to allow you to take advantage of some of the amazing heavy armor you pick up throughout your adventure. You can also wield any weapon, which isn't really a big deal because I'm going to tell you right now, if you're going this route, you almost certainly are going to want to pick large blades and get yourself a two-handed sword of some sort and go to town. But just in case you didn't want to do that, there is also a dual wield option, which would let you kind of double up on damage, which could be nice, especially if you're able to quicken yourself in some sort of manner. As a Templar, you get more damage against undead, and as I mentioned before, that's amazing. You get spells at level 4, and it's all going to be about healing and self buffs, which makes Templar an amazing option if you want to try to solo the game. Now, keep in mind that as a Templar, you're going to gain levels faster than a cleric would. So this game has a weird thing we'll talk about more in the review, where how much XP you gain is to some degree based on what class you are. So it's definitely something to keep in mind. Pure spellcasters gain levels much slower than other classes. And so if you play as a Templar, you're going to outpace Siracca. And then finally, just keep in mind, if you're thinking about replacing Helgenhar, remember that Templar is not going to automatically taunt enemies, so it's not going to be nearly as good at controlling the front line, but you're going to obviously do a lot more damage than Helgenhar or frankly even Arvex is going to be capable of. So definitely a really nice option. Next up on the list is Wintermage. Now this is another pure caster, so that means it's going to have the same advantage I've spoken about before as far as having high ranks mechanics and learning and research, allowing you to learn spells from scrolls and deploy scrolls on the battlefield to absolutely devastate enemies. Wintermage specifically focuses on cold damage, and it's an incredible bomber. There are some really nice spells in this game that are only available to you if you choose a Wintermage. And so all the way around, it's a great option. And guess what? Just like the first two, Templar and Wintermage makes for an incredible multi-class. Now, part of the advantage of multi-classing with a Templar is that you can play as a melee character, right? So that means when you don't want to use spells, you could just pull out your blade and go to town, and you're going to be just as effective. Well, you want to be able to deploy spells during that time that are going to affect enemies around you. If you're playing as a Wintermage, then you can be sure all of those spells are going to be cold damage, and therefore you can focus on getting your cold resistance as high as possible so you can easily withstand that damage while all the enemies around you are being devastated, which is different from how you would have to play if you were a spell weaver or somebody else who's using a more wide variety of different spell types, and therefore it's harder to account for what type of damage you want to be able to protect against. Again, Wintermage gets access to some incredible spells, and so having that as a Templar is going to make you more of a caster probably than a martial character, but it's still really cool. I think this will probably really work well, so something to consider. But once again, multi-classing is available across the board, so all of the different classes that I mentioned, you can combine them in a lot of different ways to get exactly what you want. All right, so you know what you need, you know what you want, you know what the party members already cover, you know what are some options for your own personal character as far as classes you can use. So finally, let me go over the builds that I use for characters to get through my playthrough of Black Geyser. All right, so we're actually at the end of the game. So I think I literally just defeated the boss right after this save. So these are basically my final stats. As I mentioned before, first on the list is Helgenhar. He served as my frontline fighter. I went hardcore into physique, which is going to allow him to deal more physical damage, increases his health, and gives him more resistance against pain, acid, and strain and pain effects, while also increasing his chance to block and parry. So obviously you want to get this as high as possible. When it comes to my general skills, I just chose brewing and drying because you have to choose something, but frankly, he doesn't do anything with stuff here. My cleric handled all of the brewing and drying that I needed on for the team. Then when it comes to class skills, I chose to give him max out his ranks rather in Command Company. So what Command Company allows you to do is he's going to get a special list of different stats or buffs rather he can give the party. As you get higher ranks in that skill, this list will expand. So this one is currently at hit and run, but actually I didn't mean to do that. But if you chose that, attack speed and movement speed of all party members increases by 30% for 3 turns at the beginning of combat. I actually prefer to go with Wolfpack, which makes attacks made against the current target of the commander deal 15% more damage. That's where what I prefer in more controlled fights, but in really large boss fights against the type of character who pulls in a ton of different enemies, you can't necessarily focus fire like that, and so hit and run made a little bit more sense. But this just gives you a really cool list of different features you could put on the party, and I felt like it made sense to go in that direction. Other class skill that I had him focus on is outdoor survival. So this is going to increase how much health you regain when you're resting outdoors. So this is nice, but not really necessary. So again, I focus on maxing this first, then go for outdoor survival. And then when it comes to weapons, as you can see, he gets a ton of weapon points. So really the world is your oyster. I focus first on large blades, I believe, because there are some large blades that are still one-handed blades. In fact, I think the last weapon I had him use was a one-handed blade. He starts actually with a pretty high rank in war clubs and hammers. So pretty much you want to get to the point where whatever is the best one-handed weapon for him at any given time, he could just pick up and use it. So eventually I maxed out everything that was one-handed related and just use whatever I felt like was best. I'm not going to reveal all the equipment here because I know some of you want to discover for yourself, but what I will just mention is you definitely want to make sure you get a belt that's going to increase his ability to taunt. So this has an effect on his chance to taunt enemies in a 10-meter range, 25%. This is really going to do a lot to help ensure he's controlling that battlefield and keeping enemies around him. Next on the list is Siracca. So she is, of course, my primary cleric. Her stats are absolute trash. You could probably very easily make a better cleric than what she's able to provide, but it is what it is. I like some of her banner, so I keep her around anyway. As far as general skills, as I mentioned, she is my main character handling brewing and drying. And in fact, if you take a look, some of these potions are going to provide you with multiple nice bonuses for your character just with one drink. And so it becomes a really nice way to buff your party without someone having to use up spell slots. Of course, she has very effective ways to buff as well, but this is basically another feather in her cap. So you probably want someone who can do some brewing and drying. I didn't use this system a whole lot, but when you want it, you definitely want it to be there. As far as class skills, like I mentioned, you want to get Abolish curses up to like a 6 or a 7. And then after that, I got Tend to Wounds, which is a skill that increases the base amount of health regained during resting at all locations. Again, this is going to work really nicely to ensure that when you rest, you fully heal, because otherwise you might have to rest multiple times in order to get your entire party up to snuff, and at any point in time you could end up being jumped. So not the best situation. Then as far as weapons, she starts with a rank of 4 in rods and staves. That's definitely a trap. In my opinion, you definitely want to go for small blades instead and max that out, because if she has small blades, then she can go ahead and use a shield. And as you can see, she has low physique, so you really want to get her some more protection. And she's not capable of using heavy armor, so she's got to have that medium armor with a shield, and along with her buffs is going to make it much easier for her to survive on the front line. So all of that together, I feel like it was relatively painless keeping her on my front line throughout my playthrough. Next on the list is Hamlin. Hamlin has pretty awesome stats for an archer. He's got really high dexterity, a little bit of physique. Could have used some more physique, but at the end of the day, he's going to give you what you want. General skills, you absolutely want to max out bargain and persuasion and ensure he's able to charm anyone that you need to. As you can see, he's up to 96%. So he's almost guaranteed to win any of those checks. Very nice. When it comes to class skills, again, it's really important for you to be able to plant items. I never had to steal an item from someone, but planting items, there's a handful of quests where that becomes really important. And so it's nice having someone who could do that. Of course, you also want to be able to lockpick. And sometimes in order to be able to lockpick, you also need to hide and sneak around. And so it was nice having high ranks in that as well. You'll notice that I never picked up any of these options that give additional dialogue choices based around a theme, like shady dealings or whatever the warrior one is. In my experience, the options you get just from having bargain and persuasion were more than enough, and I didn't need anybody to focus on the other options that were available. Obviously, you want to go ahead and max out max out bows and arrows, and then he does also actually gets bonuses. He can backstab with small blades if you're behind someone. But in my opinion, it's just vastly superior to go ahead with bows and arrows. He's not really built for frontline combat. And then just to give you an idea of some of the different arrows that are available. So this is an arrow that is specifically supposed to be used on the undead or demons. We also have another one that inflict poisoning, which is useless against undead, but against humans it can be very nice. There's a fire arrow somewhere around here. There's a succubus arrow, which will inflict bleed, which can be very nice against well-armored opponents, have them bleed out instead of trying to deal direct damage. So definitely, if you're focused on switching out some of these arrows and making sure it's aligned with the correct enemy, you can do a ton of damage. And Hamlin was one of my best damage dealers throughout the game for sure. Next up on the list is Jade. So she's my necromancer, very high intelligence, very high focus that she comes with. As far as general skills, you definitely want to focus on learning and research so that she can learn spells from scrolls and also use scrolls during combat. Very effective. You're going to get a ton of scrolls throughout the game, so it's going to make it much easier as she's leveling up, so she doesn't have to manually select everything that's in her spell book. Pulling some of that from scrolls is going to help you. I had 15 extra points, so I might as well just put in brewing and drying. Obviously, Hamlin is taking care of everything from a bargain persuasion standpoint. She focused on leveling arcane studies, which gives her more elevated energy level spells. So if you look at our spell book, at every spell level, you're going to get base energy spells, and then you're going to get elevated energy spells. And so it's important that you actually look at the slot type for the spell and know what you're going to get, so you can ensure this is going into a slot that makes sense for you. And so it's advantageous to have more elevated energy slots so that you'll basically have more slots to use. Elevated energy doesn't mean that the spell is better. It's kind of weird to me the way that they've done it. It's not like it's, oh, the elevated energy one is better than the base one. There are some spell levels where I use the base one way more than the elevated energy one, but it just gives you something different. Now, I mentioned before that you really want to be able to pick up the traps, but I use my main character for that because I wasn't sure who I was going to keep in my party. So I decided not to give that to Jade. There is no respec option. So if I could respec, I probably would have given this to Jade and then taken arcane studies for myself, but that's not viable for me. And then finally, as far as weapons, definitely go with the slings and foosball. If you go with rods and staves, whenever she's not casting, she's going to try to run into melee. You do not want Jade in melee at all, so definitely go with the slings and foosball. But that does mean you have to be diligent about making sure she has bullets in her inventory that you can use, because once those bullets run out, she'll automatically switch over to a melee weapon. Even if there's no melee weapon directly equipped to a person, if there's a melee weapon in the inventory, she'll pull it out of the inventory and start using it. So you definitely want to make sure you're watching her like a hawk and keeping her properly fitted out. And then finally, this is my main character, my Convoker. So I gave him monstrous intelligence, monstrous focus. If I could go back, I'd probably go a little bit less focus, put some of it in supernatural to get myself some more supernatural slots, but doesn't matter all that much. In general, of course, go for learning and research, get all that scroll goodness, magic perception, so that I could pick up all the traps. Again, had no trouble with traps throughout my time with the game. The one mistake I made with this build is I gave myself a 15 in rods and staffs, because the rods and the staffs are what gives your caster additional stats. So like if you want more intelligence or you want more focus, you will find rods that'll give it to you. You won't find slings that'll give it to you. But again, this is a character that I don't want in melee. So that +2 in intelligence means nothing if he's running into the fray after casting his summons and all of a sudden getting lit up. And so having a rod in his hand creates a situation where I had to do more micromanagement and it just wasn't worth it. Frankly, frankly, I wish they had slings and balls that provided some mage related stats as well, because I feel like they work much better for a long distance mage than the rods and the staffs do. One last thing to note about my build, I mentioned before that strongholds have been added to the game, and I did get a stronghold. It provides about 4 or 5 different buffs that you can choose from. I got the one that increases the health and damage of summoned creatures by 15%. That's insane, especially since it applies to the entire team. So both me and Jade, when we're throwing out our summons, they're getting a massive damage increase. Really freaking cool. And that's it. That is my entire breakdown of how you can put together your team in Black Geyser. Hopefully this video will make it much easier for those of you who have been having trouble with the game and felt like it was a little bit more difficult than what you expected. If it does and you end up playing it, definitely let me know down in the comments. I would appreciate it. Again, I will be releasing a review for this game at some point, and there'll be more CRPG content coming. So if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, hit that bell so you don't miss any of my future videos, and there are links down in the description if you want to support the channel by becoming a member or signing up on my Patreon. I will see you all in the next video. Take care.